Well, we've got Farrell Young here with us now. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine.
Great. Well, I just want to start by talking about your podcast that you host
Mhm.
with George Thomas
Yeah.
called Goat to Goat. Can you just describe the basic idea of that podcast for us, first of all, for everyone that might not have heard it?
Basically, the idea of the Go to Go podcast is really just to like be you and really just come on a platform and like express your opinions, regardless if they agree with everybody else or not. It's kind of just like a free fall podcast where we just want to give ourselves and others a voice who may not
Mm.
have had one because of like the kind of climate we live in of like kind of like censorship, but we kind of want to like
Yeah.
give people empowerment with their voice.
I was going to say, because these days, particularly, it seems to be quite a feat for somebody to speak their opinion, and a lot of people are scared to. So
Yeah,
I suppose it's great that you have the courage to have a platform and do that.
yeah.
So, what gave you the idea to start up this podcast originally then?
Just just kind of motivated by all the stuff that was like took place in like 2020. I mean, I feel like a lot of people went through a lot of stuff and
Hmm.
kind of talking to people, uh, there's a lot of like sadness. And especially for me personally, I feel like I had to do something where, I could express my emotions and kind of like give people that sense of like realness that, hey, we're all human and I we all go through stuff, whether it be relationship wise or just like life wise. I feel like I had to like
Yeah.
give that opinion. Like that was the original like plan of it.
Yeah. And when you record the podcast, do you do it together or are you kind of on Zoom? What's the situation?
We use an app called Anchor, and
Yeah.
I basically send him a link, and he would join it, and then that's how we would communicate on it.
Yeah, I guess that's quite an interesting idea because
Yeah,
Anchor can also be used to actually listen to the podcast and host it. So I
yeah,
suppose it's great that they
yeah,
have that collaboration thing to actually record the podcast.
yeah, yeah.
So, in terms of the topics that you like to talk about, what range of issues do you cover in the podcast?
We cover a bunch of issues. For starters, I mean, the very first episode was kind of controversial because we talked about like women in society. Like that was the very first episode. We talk about like American politics. We talk about the state of the world.
Yeah.
We kind of don't want to just be put into this box of just like a political podcast, which is why we talk about our personal lives and
Mm.
stuff like that because it's more like to relate to like all kinds of audiences, not just one particular audience. So we kind of like give a perspective on everything. But I
Yeah.
would say like I would kind of say like the basis of it would be like just an opinionated advice type of thing where he'll give me advice or I give him advice, but it's really advice for everybody, not just for one or the other.
Yeah, absolutely. And who would you say your main audience is? Are you trying to target a particular group of people who you might want to listen to this?
I'm trying to target any and everybody, man. I'm not really trying to
Yeah.
like I said, we don't want to be boxed into this like this youth podcast. We want to be basically like a voice for like all people and not like
Yeah.
exclude anybody from like participating in anything we do.
Yeah, absolutely. That's for sure. And in terms of the politics, what do you think about the political climate in America at the moment?
I think it's I think it's crazy
Mm.
at the moment. I think it's a lot of like division,
Yeah.
and I think that's like the focus of our podcast is not to necessarily attack people for their political views, but to kind of like more so bring people
Yeah.
together, whether whatever party you vote. We kind of look at both sides, and we are a little like critical, I would say, of like the American like left or Democratic
Mm.
side, but that doesn't mean like we hate like Democrats or anything like that. We really just want people to come together, and
Yeah.
we try to like do it in like a respectful way, or at least I would say I try to do it. George is more like off base, but we kind of want to bring people together and really see that. We don't have to be this like divided as a people.
Yeah. And do you think that any particular side is causing the division, or does it just happen because we disagree and it's not really anyone's fault?
I think it's both sides. I think when you use, I think the idea that we can use something so small, such as like somebody's like skin color, to even just separate them. I think that's like a bunch of like kind of like we've almost been like programmed to like think like he's over here, he's over there. I think we shouldn't like have a mentality. I think it's both sides. I think when you start like even having like a red and blue is like pick a color. It's like you kind of just forcing people to get on a side. I think it's both sides.
Yeah, I suppose that's the thing. In American politics, you only really have the two parties that people actually vote for, whereas in the
Yeah.
UK, we have a lot more than two. I mean, it's only
Oh
ever the
yeah.
same two that win, but at least you
Yeah.
have more options and they get a lot more seats in Parliament, the smaller parties, even though our system
Yeah.
is still messed up, but you know.
Yeah.
And what are your thoughts on racism in America as well? Because I think it's been talked about a lot in this last year, despite having always existed. So, what do you think about everything happening at the moment?
When it comes to racism, me and George are African American males,
Yeah.
so we kind of just in the climate, we feel like it's been a lot of, and this is no disrespect to anybody else, we feel like it's been a lot of like actually reverse racism, if that makes sense. We feel like just in like the climate of everything that happened, it's a lot of people of our skin color who've been able to get away with a lot of, you know, things that just because they feel like, oh, they know somebody white won't say anything because they're gonna be looked at as racist. They feel like they can say it. Like if you was to get on like a social media platform like Twitter and Instagram, how many times do you see a black person saying, "Oh, white people do this, white people do that"? But if you a white person was to do that, they would be the ones who would be counseled and blah blah. I feel like you, as black people, you can't just say you want white people to start respecting you if you're going to disrespect them, and not only like disrespect them. I feel like we disrespect ourselves in the process. I feel like our culture kind of like is accepting like things like that we're trying to stop, such as like gang violence and like drug use and like the way women are perceived as like, you know, just show off their bodies. I feel like our culture embodies that. I feel like we have a lack of respect for ourselves, and I feel like we use slavery as an excuse to attack other races and feel like nobody else can say anything to us. And I feel like that's unfair to like people of other skin colors. I feel like it's like I said, it's borderline racist itself, and I feel like we gotta do better as a people and as a nation. And we can't like, and I'm about to say, like I said, no disrespect. We can't keep. I've said this to George. If anybody wants to listen to the podcast, I said we can't keep looking back and saying slavery, slavery, slavery.
Yeah.
Because how can we move forward? Because nobody is alive from that slavery time. No white person can sit here and say, "Oh, I enslaved people, so now I have to give you." It seems like people want something for something they never went through. I feel like it's kind of like I said, you're riding the back of slavery for people that was actually enslaved. You're actually using it as an excuse to say anything you want. And I feel like and like I said, that's actually like more racist than anything to me, but that's just my personal opinion.
Yeah. And do you still sort of recognise that even now and in history, racism against black people has been a bigger issue because white people don't get killed by the police nearly as much, and maybe that matters more than comments on Twitter?
Actually, I'm just speaking for, I'm not really familiar with everywhere else, but I'm just speaking for America. If you go and look at the data, white people actually get shot more or armed by police, and I feel like policing is my grandfather was a police officer, so I'm of the mindset that I will never sit here and disrespect police or
Yeah.
say anything bad because it's just from my personal experience. Now, I do recognize that Black people have had problems, in America. Like I said, Jim Crow, slavery, blah blah. But me and George are the mindset that we're not victims. We're not gonna sit here and say we can't do something because of the color of our skin. We're not gonna sit here and say we're facing injustices because we stay in the quote unquote ghetto. So we feel like if we can go to school and be straight A students and we can, stay out of that lifestyle, we don't take on this like perception of victimhood. We kind of believe in more so hard work. And he sees George is more like divided. He's kind of not as like as togetherness as I am. But just for me personally, I don't like the fact that we keep, because this is just every interview I've watched. When we talk about systematic racism, people always bring up slavery, and I'm like, okay, show me something in 2021 where where I haven't been able to do something. And I said, even with the change of presidents, so you mean to tell me now that we have Joe Biden as a president, you can go start your own business now that you couldn't do that under Trump? You mean to tell me now that we have Joe Biden as a president, you can go have Black owned stuff, and you telling me you couldn't do that under Trump? I'm like, I don't see the problems. I feel like if I put in the work, and this should be everybody's mentality. I don't care like what skin color. If you put in the work and you feel like you can do it, it's gonna happen. Whether if you feel like somebody undeservingly gets that job, doesn't mean you still won't get it. Doesn't mean that your hard work didn't pay off. Don't just give up and say, oh, it's because I'm Black. Don't take on that victimhood mentality. I feel like you have to keep pushing and keep striving to be the best you can be.
Yeah. Well, where are we able to check out the podcast if we'd like to have a listen to it then?
You can check it out on platforms such as like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, of course, Anchor. A bunch of like third-party podcast sites too. I'm not sure if it's on like Amazon podcast quite yet, but it's if you were just to go on like any other streaming platform and look for our podcast, it would definitely be on there.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for joining us on the show today. It's been a very interesting chat.
Yeah, thanks for having me.